Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, April 19th, 2007. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, Chris Colby from Brew Your Own Magazine joins us to tell us a tale of two IPAs, the traditional English standard and the rebellious American counterpart. Well, if you're new to home brewing or would like to get into the hobby, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through the basic and more advanced brewing techniques. Well, here's a reminder. The American Homebrewers Association's 10th annual Big Brew Day is coming up on May the 5th. You can see details about the event as well as the 3 recipes that they're suggesting to brew on that big day on beertown.org. Also, I received an email from the AHA saying that in celebration of Big Brew Day, if you join the AHA by May 11th, you'll get a free book along with your membership. So check that out on beertown.org. I got a couple of questions that run along the same lines, so I'll kind of lump them together here. Jeff from Bremerton, Washington writes, "Here's my question for you and the other listeners. I've heard over and over that after bottling, you want to let it sit for 10 days or so to allow it to carbonate and then let it age. Okay, does that mean I should allow it to age sitting at room temperature or throw all the bottles in the fridge and age in there? Or both? What is the proper aging process? And if it is both, what are the benefits to either?" Also, I heard from our friend Naveen in India. It's been a while since I've gotten a letter from him, so it was good to hear from Naveen. He says, "I'm back into brewing!" ! So that's good. When someone is bottle conditioning, Naveen says, after priming and bottling, where does one store the beer? I usually bottle and then leave it at 32°C for a week. Then transfer it to my fridge that is about 8°C. But you see, the problem here is I don't have a lot of space left in my fridge. Can homebrew after bottling be stored at 32 Celsius? Well, for those of us still in the dark ages of measuring temperature, 32°C is equivalent to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And 8°C, which is the temperature of his fridge, is around 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, from what I've read and heard, 32°C or 90°F is pretty warm for storing beer for any length of time. Short term, you're probably okay, but if you want to cellar your beer or age it, I'm afraid it might stale pretty quickly, relatively quickly at that high a temperature. Now, I've heard from different sources that beer is best stored in similar temperatures to wine storage temperatures, around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, or that would be around 10 to 13 Celsius. Lagers might like it a little cooler, and big beers might like it a little warmer. I myself store my beers in my basement once they're carbonated. I leave them at room temperature upstairs until they're carbonated, then I put them in the basement. In the wintertime, it hits a low of around 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius, and in the summer, it climbs into the mid-60s or around 18 Celsius. But most of my beer doesn't stay around that long. I'm not talking about years here. For Jeff, unless you're trying to age a barley wine, I say once your beers get good and carbonated and tasty, feel free to keep them in the fridge if you have room. Or, you know, if your room temperature is relatively cool, if you've got an air conditioner, you're probably good there as well. But Naveen has a different situation. He's got limited space in the fridge, and it's hot in India, at least to my standards. 90 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty darn warm. We here in Arkansas, we have the AC on. So anyway, I suggested that he brew in small batches so he wouldn't have a lot of beer to store. And Naveen says he's already brewing in smaller volumes. So what do you say? Those of you who live in hot climates, what do you think? Do you experience premature staling of your beer if you keep it very warm, say 32°C or 90 Fahrenheit? And if it does, what strategies do you follow other than getting a dedicated beer fridge which is not practical for everybody to do for space considerations or other reasons. So what do? Drop me a line at james@basicbrewing.com or use the contact form on basicbrewing.com and let me know what you think. And, don't forget to tell me where you're from if you do use the contact form, and be sure to check your email address so that I can so that my reply to you won't get bounced back. I got a fun email from Lars from Copenhagen, who apparently wrote while still in the air. Lars says, "Quick, what's the distance from Europe to Boston?" Well, measured in Basic Brewing podcasts, about 5. And Lars says, "This also allows time for a healthy nap." I don't know if it's simultaneous or not. But anyway, Lars says, "I flew from Copenhagen via Iceland to Boston and managed to listen to your 5 latest shows. Thanks for coming along for the ride." Well, thanks for taking us, Lars. And do we get frequent flyer miles too? Because, that'd be good. Lars says he especially enjoyed the sanitization shows. And I still get a lot of good feedback from those shows with Merle Landman from National Chemicals and Charlie Talley from 5 Star Chemicals. Along those lines, Dave from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada writes in with a quick sanitizing tip. When it comes to creating an iodophore solution, the metric proportions are easy to remember. 1 milliliter of iodophore per liter of water. I measure mine with a 10 cc, i.e. 10 milliliter syringe, minus the needle, into a 1 liter spritzer bottle, originally for misting houseplants. The spritzer bottle lets me spray down anything that needs it in a really quick and convenient way. There you go, 1 milliliter to 1 liter of water, 1 milliliter of iodophore per liter of water. Very good. That is quick and easy to remember. Mark from Waukesha, Wisconsin, I think I'm getting that right, says, "What do you think about putting fruit in a beer? For example, lemon in Hefeweizen, orange in wheat beer, lime in gasp Corona. Does this, in your opinion, take away from the originally intended flavor of the beer or complement it?" Well, that's a good question, Mark. While we brag, Steve and I brag on beer's ability to pair with foods, I have to say that I'm one that will take the fruit off my glass if I'm drinking a good beer. For instance, I think a lemon would mask some of the wonderful flavors that come from a Franziskaner Hefeweizen or a similarly crafted homebrew. However, I think a Corona, frankly, benefits from a lime wedge. But that's just my beer snobbiness coming through, though, probably. One of the biggest sins I've ever seen, beer-wise, in a restaurant was in a Mexican restaurant not far from here. I ordered a Bass Ale, and it came to me in the bottle with a chunk of lime sticking out of the top. So there you go. You know you're a beer geek when you get offended by fruit sticking out of your beer. David Morgan from Dunedin, Florida, who we interviewed in Orlando at the National Homebrewing Conference last year. You may remember he's one of the brewers who brews pepper beers, and they had some delicious pepper beers that we tasted down there. Anyway, David wrote in to tell us about a pepper beer homebrew competition down in Dunedin. I've been saying Dunedin the whole time, but he says it's more like saying Dun-Eaton. So Dunedin. The first annual Pepper Extravaganza will be accepting entries from May 13th through May 27th. Man, that'd be a fun one to judge, or at least to watch the sweat roll off the foreheads of the judges as they taste those spicy beers. I'll post a link to the Dunedin Brewers Guild. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Dunedin Brewers Guild site in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. Well, we got more great email, but not so much time this week. So let's get on to our interview with Chris Colby of Brew Your Own Magazine. Chris lets us in on a couple of articles that were in the latest issue of BYO. He tells us about the split personality of the India Pale Ale, its British roots, and its American evolution. Well, Chris Colby, welcome again to Basic Brewing Radio.
Good morning, James.
We're talking this week about a favorite topic of, I'm assuming, a lot of our listeners out there, and that is India Pale Ales, or IPAs.
Yeah, IPAs, obviously a big favorite of home brewers and, also beer drinkers. It's a style that, it started in England, obviously. It was originally brewed in London. Then it sort of migrated to Burton-on-Trent, where it became very, very famous. And very recently, of course, in the United States, it got picked up by brewers here who sort of, took the style and ran with it. And interestingly enough, it's still sort of spreading. I was at the beer store yesterday, and there's a Belgian brewery that makes at least a couple beers. One called Mick Choof and one called La Choof, and they actually have an IPA triple out now. I just got a 750 of that, and so I'm excited to try that. Some Scottish breweries too have started brewing IPAs, sort of different than the usual Scottish ale, which is where the focus is on malt. So
is there a Belgian twist to the Belgian examples?
I don't know yet. Haven't tried it. Just got it yesterday. I'm going to assume because it's Belgian that there is, but I haven't tried it yet. So,
would it be safe to say that Americans have really been maybe more enthusiastic about the style than where it originated?
Recently, yeah. In the new issue of BYO, we have two articles on IPA. One on American IPA that I wrote, and one by Terry Foster on English IPA. And he mentions that finding a good, even a good English-style IPA in England these days is a little bit harder than you might think. A lot of the most famous ones there are sort of large regional breweries, and, at least according to him, they aren't that good, that good of an interpretation of the style.
And Americans, with our typical fervor and gusto, have taken the style past the boundaries that were originally extreme. For beer, the extreme bitterness. We've taken it way past where it was before.
Yeah, at least if I remember the sort of history of American IPA, this is something that I don't go into in the article. It's just focused on brewing, but. The history is that Anchor started, or the recent history was that Anchor started brewing Liberty here, and that was one of the first sort of big cascadey, beers, and then it was followed by Sierra Nevada started putting out Celebration. I mean, they'd already put out their Pale Ale, which was a bigger, a more hoppier version of a Pale Ale, but then Celebration. Sort of like an IPA, much bigger. And then, from there, there's a lot of other breweries, just started picking up on that style. And subsequent to that, of course, there was sort of the second wave of the double IPAs hitting, and where the original gravity got bumped up, another like 20 points or so, and the hops, just people started just hopping the beer to saturation, pretty much as far as bitterness is concerned. And so Americans have really taken to the style and taken it to the hoop, as it were.
Well, since you guys you compare and contrast the USA example and the British example, let's kind of do that. First of all, let's start with just the style description. Where do the two styles compare, and where do they separate?
Right. Well, the two styles are very similar. They're both very hop-focused beer styles. When you taste an IPA, whether it's a good version of an English IPA or a really good American IPA, the focus is on hops. You want to taste a nice, clean hop bitterness up front. You want to taste hop flavor in the middle, and you want to have that hop flavor, linger into the aftertaste. You want it, to be hops in the beginning, hops in the middle, hops at the end. And both of those, both the beers deliver. both the sub-styles deliver on that respect. And the grain bill is also very similar for these two. They're both pale ale based beers or whatever. They're pale malt is the base. A certain amount of crystal can be used in both. And one slight difference though is American sort of the trying to think of the right word. The sort of prototypical American IPA is a little bit lighter in color and a little bit better attenuated than sort of prototypical British style. The British styles are mashed just a little bit higher for more fermentability. They may have a little bit more crystal malt in them, a little more specialty malt, and just a little bit bigger malt presence in the English styles, whereas the American styles, a little bit cleaner malts, highly attenuated, but a little stronger and more hops.
So they're both fairly well. If you're used to hop bitterness, they're both fairly drinkable.
Yes, yeah, they're both. I mean, they're both hoppy, but at least compared to a lot of current versions of double IPAs and such, that the hops are, they're big. There's a good hop bitterness, good full hop flavor and aroma, but not over the top.
And how would you characterize the contrast between the hop characteristics between the styles?
Well, the big thing is that the British style ones typically use English hops. Particularly Kent Goldings is a hop that's used a lot in there. Although actually the use of American hops in English beers is something that goes way back, so it's not absolutely clear cut. And but the sort of prototypical English examples will use Goldings or maybe a little Fuggles in the hopping, whereas sort of the archetype of an American IPA is something with a lot of the big citrusy American hops, particularly what people call the C hops, like Chinook or Columbus, and especially Centennial, and especially Cascades. Any of those very American tasting hops are what a lot of the very first IPAs that came out, and a lot of the very first sort of big hoppy beers that maybe weren't labeled IPAs in America, when those came out, they featured Cascade hops or maybe Centennial, and that sort of carried through. A lot of people in an American IPA want sort of a characterful hop in their beer, not necessarily Kent Goldings is a great hop, but has a very clean sort of hop bitterness, whereas with a lot of these American hops, there's a little more character. There's the citrus in them, and there's the other things that sort of tip you off that that's an American hop.
An American IPA is more in your face, I think, than an English style, wouldn't you say?
Typically, yeah. Everything is just everything except the color, and the. But yeah, overall, a little bit stronger. It's a little bit more attenuated, which leads to a drier beer. But also, definitely, the hops are usually cranked up, usually one notch, I would say, above English hops. They're not, in a standard single American IPA, the hops aren't just, blown out compared to the English styles, but they're a little bit more, a little bit more forcible, more present.
And because you're using a lot of hops, and there is a lot of bitterness, and you want that bitterness to have a certain characteristic, where in other styles you may not worry about it so much. In this style, you probably want to at least think about looking at your water in the brewing, right?
Right. Water is something that a lot of people pay attention to when they brew IPAs. I mean, I would argue that you should pay some attention to it for every beer you brew, but certain styles have become very, very, sort of water-centric, or people pay a lot of attention to it. And in IPAs, this is largely because where IPAs hit their sort of historical apex was in Burton-on-Trent, which has famously very, very hard water. So a lot of people, now when you go to the homebrew shop, your homebrew shop may carry something called Burton salts, which, supposedly you dump that in your water and it mimics Burton-on-Trent water. So, people pay a lot of attention to it. And the thing about both of these styles is you want a fair amount of calcium in your brewing water. You can add that either by adding gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, or you can add calcium chloride. For any pale beer, you want sufficient calcium in the mash to establish a good pH. The second thing that you might want in the water is sulfate. Sulfate ions bring out the sort of hop character of the beer, accentuate the bitterness, and so you can add sulfate to the water if you need it by adding, again, gypsum, calcium sulfate. So, by adding that, you get sort of both of the things you need. And finally, one thing that you should pay attention to in your water is bicarbonate, and that's something you generally don't want in a pale beer. That tends to it raises the mass pH and it dulls the beer out. And in hoppy beers, too much sulfate leads to a very coarse hop presentation. The hops you actually get more hop bitterness, but it's just very it's aggressive in an unpalatable way. Not like I would argue that there are some of the higher cohumulone hops have an aggressive bitterness, but to me there's good aggressive and there's bad aggressive.
And would you recommend that someone get a water report from their local water supply before they go kind of mucking around and?
Yeah, before you undertake any sort of water treatment plan, you need to know what's in your water initially. And one nice thing about, although British were traditionally brewed with Burton-on-Trent water, and in America, the types of water they use to make IPA just run the gamut from very, very soft to very hard. You can, if you're one of those people who just don't want to bother with all the water treatment stuff, your first course of action might be just to brew a batch and see how it turns out. Because you have especially with American styles, there's not really a fixed water profile that's best, beyond what having sufficient calcium to establish the mash pH and that. But we give in the article we give sort of suggested ranges for these things, the different ions or whatever. Like for American ones, you want less than 50 parts per million of bicarbonate. Although if you're brewing a more amber example, if you've got more colored specialty malts, it can maybe creep up to about 100. For calcium, you want your calcium level at a minimum to exceed the level of bicarbonate, and then from there on it can go anywhere from very little to to high levels. In the article I say up to 250 parts per million, but if you got higher than that, it wouldn't be the end of the world really either.
So if you're an extract brewer, do you have to worry less about water treatment?
Yeah, you have to worry a lot less because for one thing, your wort has been made for you and then condensed. So whatever sort of mineral profile that the malt extract producer used in their water is going to be either condensed or dried into your malt extract. So as an extract brewer, your best bet is to use a very soft water, either distilled water or if your water is naturally soft, and reconstitute that wort. It'll have then all the minerals that were present when the malt extract was manufactured. And if you want to, you can supplement by adding a little bit of calcium sulfate. That's not going to hurt, and it might bring out a little bit of more hop bitterness. But probably the first time you try it with a specific kind of malt extract, your best bet as an extract brewer probably would be to use either soft or distilled water. First, make the beer, taste it, and then see if you feel you need a little bit more gypsum first, because especially a lot of the English extracts are going to be made from fairly hard water anyway. So you might not need to be adding more drywall to your beer.
Along with the hops being forward on the style, it's also often described as being a malty style, and you do a good job of kind of defining what malty really means in beer, and there may be some misconceptions out there about what malty means.
Right. Malty is, I guess it shouldn't be surprising, but malty flavors come from malt. I mean, it seems like people would get that, but I mean, there is some confusion amongst homebrewers, and it's partially kind of understandable how it got that way. But basically, malty flavors come from malt. It's when malt is made, as we discussed on another show, they steep it, they let it germinate, but then they kiln it. They heat it, and the husks, and somewhat penetrating into the interior, but mostly in the husks, there forms some Maillard products. They get heated, and there's some color and flavor develops. And when you mash the beer, you crush their grains, soak them in hot water, and the flavors and colors from the husk dissolve, into your wort, and then survive the fermentation. That's where your malt flavors come from.
So a beer that's sticky sweet isn't necessarily malty.
Right. Basically, in a beer, if you add more malt, it's going to be maltier. Okay? But another thing that comes along with that, the more malt you add, if all other things are kept equal, the higher it's going to finish, the higher the final gravity. And that leads to a little bit, more viscous, chewy, more sweet beer, And so some people have sort of confused the two, and, people will talk about, sweet stouts being very, very malty. And it's like, well, not really. They're roasty and sweet, but that's, not really malty. And but for IPAs, either English or American, you do want it very malty. You want, in the English style, there's typically a nutty, biscuity kind of malt character, and paired with that, there's a sort of moderate finishing gravity to produce, a sort of big beer to match the hops. And in the American style, the color's lighter and there's more attenuation, creating a drier beer, and then there's typically, at least in sort of the archetypical examples, less crystal malt, so it's a cleaner beer, but there is a lot of malt. They don't reach the higher gravities by adding, like sugar, like in a Belgian triple or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's an all malt beer, and so even though it's all pale malt, you get a nice, a nice maltiness. Even in a very light colored beer, like Stone IPA is one of my favorite IPAs. And if you've ever poured one out, it's very light. I don't know what the SRM is, but certainly in the single digits, and probably somewhere in the mid single digits. But it's still very malty. It's got a nice, clean, malt profile that really sort of, sets the stage for the hops. And, like a Full Sail IPA is another one that's very, very light in color, and, a lot of the other examples are.
So what would a malt bill look like for an American IPA, and how would that contrast with what a malt bill would look like for an English version? Right.
For an American IPA, your most straightforward choice for base malt would just be like domestic two-row malt. But, I mean, obviously here in America we have access to malts from all over, and, you can use them if you want. You can go with an English malt. That's going to give you the more sort of English, nutty, biscuity thing. You can go with, for sort of a cleaner one, you can go with, at least compared to the English, you can go with like a German Pilsner malt. Or you can, you can blend two or more malts if you want together. To like blending a couple base malts can make for, like a subtle layer of complexity. But really, domestic two-row malt, that's a great starting point for an American IPA, and then accentuated with a little bit of crystal malt. For an English IPA, you definitely want to, you want to get that sort of English malt flavor And so, picking an English pale ale malt, the ones made from or malted from the Maris Otter variety of barley are very popular and make a very sort of prototypical British flavor in your beer. And so, that's what a lot of people pick. That's what in his article Terry Foster recommends. And those, you can also accentuate with a little bit of crystal malt, maybe a little bit more. Typical American IPA, although they vary considerably, maybe 5% crystal malt in an American IPA is a good target. And in English IPAs, again, where they vary considerably. The original ones, in fact, crystal malt hadn't been invented yet when IPA sort of reached its heyday historically. But modern, maybe 10% in an English style IPA, and that's your malt bill for those two. You can keep it very simple. You can, if you want, you can fiddle around with some little additions. Like a lot of American IPAs will throw in a little bit of Munich malt to add, some of that classic malty flavor and, not very much color. You can, in an English style IPA, you can throw in a little bit of biscuit malt if you want. In either one, you could maybe experiment with a little bit of amber malt in there, just enough to make a nice undercurrent of, the amber malt flavor. Although I wouldn't, or at least it's not traditional to go nuts with that malt.
And if you do want to go nuts and experiment with different things, you may be straying outside the style guidelines, which is just fine. But since we are talking about the styles,
sure, yeah. In the article, we keep it pretty close to what the styles are, quote unquote, supposed to be. But obviously, as a home brewer, and as someone, if you're just making up your own beer at home for your your house ale or whatever, yeah, do whatever you want, and you have a lot of options. But if you're trying to make sort of a representative example of one of these styles, then simple hop bills are better.
What about for extract brewers? Would you start with a very light malt extract and then build on top of that with specialty malts and grains?
Yeah, for an extract brewer, your starting point is going to be, for an American IPA, find American light or pale malt extract. For an English one, find an English pale ale malt extract. There are even, I hear, Maris Otter sort of malt extracts available. And that would be a good start. And then, supplement with a little bit of crystal. A somewhat better approach would be to do a mini mash. You can, quote-unquote, steep some base grains along with your specialty grains, as long as you pay attention to, the temperature that you steep them at and the volume of water you steep them in. So, one thing that a partial mash will give you that like just plain steeping only the specialty grains won't is you'll get a little bit more of that malt flavor and aroma in your beer, whereas in an extract beer, when it's either condensed or dried, you do, I think, I've heard people, mainly malt extract manufacturers claim that it's not true, but I think you lose a little bit of the aromatics or whatever, and doing a partial mash returns some of that to the beer.
Now we come to the important part, the hops. Along with the hop varieties to choose, are there different hopping strategies to take for each style?
Yeah, IPA and especially American IPAs, and then also if you expand it to think about American double IPAs, they've really explored just about every possible way to hop the beers. The sort of traditional way to hop up a beer, a hoppy English style ale, is you put a good dose of hops up front as your bitterness hops. You boil that for either all of the boil or the last 60 minutes of the boil or something like that. You boil the hops really well, extract as much bitterness as you can, and then at the end you supplement it by adding in some late addition hops, and these can come either with starting at about 20 minutes left in the boil all the way to right at the end of the boil, or you can put in a couple additions, one with, say, 15 minutes to go and one with, right at the end. Or, you can have multiple additions within that framework, or within that time range. And that's sort of, the idea there is that you boil most of your hops for a long time, get as much bitterness out of them as you can, and then, add hop flavor and aroma at the end, by adding the late hops, which aren't boiled as long, and the aromatic compounds won't completely, vaporize and be boiled off. And, for commercial brewers concerned with, now having to pay for the hops, obviously, and then secondarily, in your wort, hops absorb water, and so the more hops you add, means the more, wort that those hops, the hop debris is going to, soak up, and so you're losing, wort that way, essentially. Is how commercial brewers would think about it. So the traditional way of hopping with, big addition first and sort of supplemented with a small addition later is a way that you get a good amount of bang for your buck. You get as much bitterness as possible out, you get a nice flavor and aroma from the late addition, and you've added, the least possible hops to get there. Another strategy, though, that a lot of American craft brewers, use is, multiple additions, including often many times additions through the middle of the boil, when normally, most brewers, traditionally wouldn't have done that. Because, if you're adding, a substantial amount of hops during the middle of the boil, they're not being boiled as long, so you're not extracting as much bitterness. But also mid-boil hops are, as in theory, you're boiling them long enough to boil off a lot of the aroma and flavor, so you're sort of stuck in, some people would argue a little bit of a vomit zone there, that you're just, you're not getting as much bitterness, and yet you're boiling off the flavor and aroma. Other people would argue, of course, that there is a character you get from adding hops to the middle of the boil, and there are, of course, a lot of American IPAs and double IPAs that, employ a strategy where hops are added, either multiple times throughout the boil or, as in the case of Dogfish Head, straight through the boil. Like, to pick a normal IPA, Dogfish Head 60-minute is made with, hops dribbled into the kettle throughout the boil. And, obviously, they think that, it's not wasting hops to add them in the middle boil, and that gives them a character that they can't get. Whereas, other very, very hoppy brews, like I know, this is a double IPA, but I know that Stone Ruination is produced mostly or entirely, I can't remember, with a single hop addition right at the beginning.
Huh.
So, people have, commercial brewers do it both ways. It turns out well both ways. And so, homebrewers should just, we're generally not too concerned with the economics. If we want to add an extra ounce of hops, the however much, the $1.50 that costs probably isn't going to, break us. And likewise, if we, the, couple ounces of wort that, gets absorbed by that, we're not going to fret over because we're brewing 5 gallons at a time. So, homebrewers should really just experiment with the type of hopping they like. And actually, there's a third kind where you can add, with or without an initial bittering addition, you can add a very large amount of hops at the end. And there are some American beers, American hoppy beers that actually most of the IPA, most of the IBUs, the bittering units, come from late addition hops. You've added so many hops late in the boil that actually your bitterness comes from there, and there's some people feel a different character to the bitterness that you get from adding a lot of late hops. And of course, adding a lot of late hops also makes a tremendous amount of hop flavor and aroma in your beer. So that's a third option, is to go easy on your initial hop additions and then just lay it on in the end.
Yeah, I think I mentioned. I think we've talked about this, and I think I've mentioned it on the show as well. I did an experiment lately with a Simcoe extract beer where I only boiled for 15 minutes. And what I did was I took the hops that I would have added at 60 minutes for bittering, doubled the amount, and added them at 15 minutes, which is the beginning of the boil, and then added the aroma hops and flavoring hops as usual. And man, the difference in hop flavor and aroma is incredible, especially using fresh Simcoe hops. It's just a wonderful thing to do. So, yeah, on the homebrew scale, you're not going to be spending thousands of dollars on hops or whatever to to do this. We're not Anheuser-Busch or anything, but it's fun to play with late hopping additions and to just experiment with what that would do.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a way at the end of separating your hops from your wort, yeah, you definitely, experimenting with when you add the hops, is a great thing, and will, let you explore different flavors. And I mean, also, of course, adding hops in the boil is, can be only the start for an IPA brewer. There's traditionally, obviously, there's dry hopping, but people have also tried things such as, mash hopping, first wort hopping, and then, of course, you have another thing that was sort of pioneered by Dogfish Head was, I guess you call it serving hopping. They have the Randall where you have a column full of hops and you pull a pitcher of beer or foam, usually if you've seen one of those work, out at the end, and then it settles down quickly, but yeah, you can. There's definitely multiple ways to hop a beer. Hop jack is another one that works very good. If you know what a hop jack is, it's like it's a little vessel that's in between your kettle and your fermenter, or actually your fermenter and your chiller, and you run hot wort after the boil into it, and it's got a layer of hops, and so all your wort, the hot wort, filters through the hops before it goes to the chiller. And this gives, of course, since the wort is hot but not boiling, it dissolves most of those aromatic compounds into the beer, and that carries off into your wort and subsequently your beer. So that's another hopping option.
I'm waiting for someone to come up with like a hop tea bag that you can actually put in your glass as you're drinking, so that you get to, it's at the point of delivery as well. Or maybe like one of those little packets of chewing tobacco that you put in your mouth.
Yeah.
Maybe you can. How much closer to the mouth can we get the hopping? But I'm encouraging all of that.
Just a plain old hop cone in your beer. I've done that a lot of times. Just a couple hop cones, and it probably doesn't do as much as I think, but it's kind of fun.
So, did we cover the hopping strategies of the English side enough? Do you think?
On the English side, they mostly stick with the traditional version. There's certainly no reason you couldn't experiment, but classic English IPAs were, big dose of bittering hops early on, and then a little bit of Kent Goldings or Fuggles at the end to round out the flavor.
So you've got all these hops in your kettle at the end of the boil, and you've cooled down your wort with an immersion chiller, let's say. What do you do with all that hop debris? How do you get around dealing with that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And that's sort of, IPAs are brewed very much like a standard ale. You've got, there's nothing really in their procedure that differs that much from other ales, but the one thing that does is that you've got a lot of hop debris at the end of your boil, and so you need some way to separate these out. If you're an all grain brewer and you have a plumbed kettle, one that has the spigot attached or whatever, you probably have a hop screen inside your kettle, which is just sort of like a manifold with a screen over it, and when you open the spigot and run the wort off, the hop screen will screen out your hops. But a lot of brewers, and especially stovetop brewers, just brew, in a straight pot or a big kettle, and you sort of need some way to, get your wort off that big layer of hops. And you have a couple options. One thing I do a lot when I brew a very hoppy beer is you'll cool the beer down, and then I'll just pull out the chiller, stick the cover on the kettle, and I'll go, clean equipment or whatever, and just let it settle for about an hour or two. As long as the top's on the kettle, you shouldn't have to worry about contamination too much. And during that time, both the hot break or cold break and hop debris will settle, and it'll compact itself fairly well over that amount of time. And then you can just take your racking cane and siphon off the top. You can also, if you want to, if you go to a store that sells those stainless steel chore boys, they look sort of like Brillo pads, but they're actually made from stainless steel. If you get one, this of course not treated with detergents or anything, but just one of those, you can just sort of crumple it up around the end of your racking cane, and in that case, you can go ahead pretty much and stick the racking cane all the way to the bottom, and have that filter out the hops and stuff when you rack your wort over. Another thing you can do, if you just have a funnel with a screen in it, you can sanitize that, and you can either pour like your entire chilled wort through that and have the screen, sort of separate the hops and the wort, or I think a little better option is to do, let the material settle, rack as much as you can off the top, and then pour the last little bit through the funnel, and have that way simply the funnel doesn't clog up by pouring all the wort through it. If you take a little sanitized spoon and just sort of scoop around at right at the screen, you can keep it from clogging.
I found out that if I do a whirlpool, after I use an immersion chiller and I chill the wort, and after I chill the wort, I take a sanitized big spoon and just stir the heck out of the wort and get it going really well, and just let it settle for 15, 20 minutes, and it makes it a whole lot easier to siphon. I use pellets, and so you can use a racking cane, and by putting the racking cane at the edge of the kettle and following the wort down as it comes out, the debris is in a cone pretty much at the bottom, and you can keep your racking cane to the side and pretty much stay away from most of the debris.
Yeah, whirlpool. A lot of people, commercial brewers use that a lot. They actually have a special tank to do that in, for that very reason. The wort spins around and around, and the wort is forced to the outside of the kettle, and the solids sort of then get pushed inwards, and so they fall in a little cone in the middle.
When we did the blind mice brew, way back, if you look in the archives, way back we did a blind mice brew, and we had a lot of whole hops, and the whirlpool didn't work as well with whole hops, but with pellets it does work well. So once you've got the wort into the fermenter, talk about yeast and fermentation strategies and how they are similar and differ between the two styles.
Right. Well, they're similar in that you're brewing an ale in both cases, and the big difference between the two is that American ales are typically made with what's called a clean ale yeast, one that doesn't produce a lot of those fruity esters. Whereas in the English style, you expect a little bit more of that English style fruity ale character. Beyond that, the fermentation recommendations for both styles are very, very similar. You want to, since you're brewing a beer that's a little bit stronger than sort of an average strength beer, IPAs are a little bit bigger. You definitely want to ensure that you pitch enough yeast, to get a good healthy ferment. And this is, it's true for both styles, but maybe a little bit more true for American styles because you're shooting for a fairly, high level of attenuation in an American ale, and you're not gonna get it if you underpitch. Likewise, in both styles, you want to aerate well. You don't IPA is not a style where you need to go nuts with aeration. You don't have to, aerate multiple times, leading up to high Kreuzen or anything. But you do want a good shot of aeration at the beginning. And then, of course, you want to keep control of your temperatures. Standard ale temperatures work well for an IPA. You might want to shy away from the very upper range of that because with a slightly thicker wort, the wort's gonna heat up on its own due to fermentation, and you wouldn't want the heat of fermentation then to push yourself over the range, and lead to a more fruity, beer than you planned for. Also, you've got a lot of the hop aromatics in your wort, and the vigor of fermentation is going to affect how many of those you blow off. And so if you keep it sort of on the cooler end of fermentation, you still want a vigorous fermentation. You don't want to, try to increase your hop aroma by having a sluggish fermentation. But, keeping it a little cooler and still running a good fermentation, you retain, just a little bit more of the hop aromatics that way. So, I mean, I personally, when I do an American IPA or just any sort of hoppy ale, I like to use the, either Weiss 1056 or White Labs 001, the, sort of the Chico strain or whatever. There's also a dried version of it available now. And, ferment sort of on the low end of where that will work well. And, that retains, it'll still, that yeast will still, chug away and get the attenuation you want. But, leaves a nice hop aroma left over. And
on the English side, you want a warm enough fermentation to get the fruity esters, but not so warm that you start getting off flavors from the higher alcohols, right?
Right. Yeah. In the English strain, I mean, you can still the strains themselves are fruity enough that you can ferment even on the low end of their range, and you'll still pull out a little bit of that fruit. But as the temperature increases, you'll get an increasing amount of the fruity esters out of there, and for that's the sort of thing where if you've never if you're using an English strain that you've never used before, take really good notes about what temperature you fermented at, and then taste the beer and take really good notes about the fermentation characteristics. How estery was it? Did you like it? Blah blah blah. And then the next time you brew, adjust it according to that. If you're an experienced brewer and you've used a strain over and over, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what temperature range produces what sort of characters, and you can use your own experience that way. But as a brewer who hasn't used a particular strain, probably best to shoot for sort of the middle of the recommended range to start off with. That'll give you sort of the average character of the yeast, and then you can work your way from there to do to manipulate the subtle changes in yeast performance and characteristics.
Well, as usual, at the end of the conversation, I'm thirsty after talking to you, Chris, and
thirsty for IPA, but it's only 11 o'clock in the morning.
Shh.
What a bitter dilemma, so to speak.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere. Well, I enjoyed talking to you, and I enjoyed seeing you and Jennifer down in Austin when I was down there recently, and I hope that Kelly and I didn't bore you too much with too many funeral home stories and such as that.
No, it was fine. and you got recognized, too. We were at the draft house, and someone came up to James and said, "Oh, I recognize you for your podcast or whatever."
Yeah.
And then, funnily enough, you said, "Oh, and this is Chris from BYO," and the guy just shrugged, nah, whatever.
Yeah, I think his name was Garrett, maybe. I get recognized so infrequently that I can remember everybody. But yeah, that was fun. I really appreciated him coming up and just shaking my hand, and he didn't buy me a beer or anything, but
Yeah, he could have gone that extra mile.
I can't look a gift horse in the mouth there. But anyway, well, I appreciate your time again, Chris. Happy brewing to you.
You too.
Well, thanks again to Chris Colby for spending time with us. It's always fun to talk to Chris. If you click on the banner ad for BYO on basicbrewing.com or basicbrewingradio.com, you can get a free issue of that magazine. And if you subscribe after you get that free issue, you will be helping to support this podcast. And we appreciate everybody who's done that so far. I look forward to BYO when it comes every time. Next week, I will probably run the show that I recorded with Andy Sparks. Andy talked a bit about the Strong Ale Festival he attended in Boulder, and we finally get to go over your email about brewing software. So you'll want to tune in for that. Speaking of brewing software, remember, if you follow the link from last week's show to Kent Place Software, you Mac users can get 25% off the full price of Beer Alchemy, brewing software for the Mac. I think it's 25% off. Just use the coupon code BASICBREWING when you check out. That's Basic Brewing, all one word. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And while you're on our site, you can check out our online shop where you can find great pricing on our DVDs and a combo deal to save you even more. In Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort, and including batch sparging and fly sparging, step mashing and infusion mashing. It's all there. And you can see a listing, a growing listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online from us, and I will box it up for you myself. And thanks to everybody, thanks to all of our homebrew shops out there who are selling the DVDs. That's just wonderful. And also thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are the Canon PowerShot SD1000 7.1 megapixel digital ELPH camera with 3 times optical zoom. Black, by the way. And the soundtrack from Garden State. It's good stuff on there. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, and we'll get a little chunk of that. And we appreciate your support. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson, who's in Austin and also designed our logo. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.